Somewhere on the edge of the known world, beyond the last city, beyond the last minaret, beyond the last whisper of civilization, a storm was forming. Not a storm of clouds, a storm of men. Picture the 9th century. The world's great empires are confident, settled, wealthy. To the south, the mighty Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, a city of 1,000,000 souls. To the east, the refined Samanid dynasty. And between them all, an ocean of grass. The Eurasian steppe, endless, merciless, cold in winter, boiling in summer. This is where our story begins. Not in a palace, not in a library, in a felt tent, on a horse, under stars so thick they looked like spilled milk. This is the story of a single family, obscure, nomadic, overlooked, who rose from servitude under a Jewish empire, wandered the steppe with nothing but their horses and their pride, converted to Islam in a forgotten border town, survived betrayal, imprisonment, death, and the fury of the greatest warlord of the age, and then, in less than 2 generations, shook the entire Islamic world to its foundations. Who were the Seljuks? Where did they come from? What made them different from the hundreds of other nomadic tribes who lived and died on that steppe, leaving behind nothing but bones? That is exactly what we are going to find out. Stay with me, because this story is extraordinary. To understand the Seljuks, you must first understand who the Oghuz Turks were. The Oghuz were a vast confederation of Turkic nomadic tribes. Their homeland stretched from the steppes north of the Caspian and Aral Seas, modern-day Kazakhstan, eastward toward the lands of the Seljuk Turks near Lake Balkhash. This was not empty land. This was a world full of political drama, tribal rivalries, shifting alliances, and breathtaking violence. The Oghuz were organized under a supreme ruler called the Yabgu. He was the king of the steppe, but this was not a monarchy in the way we imagine. Tribal chiefs, beys, commanded their own warriors, their own flocks, their own loyalties. These people were extraordinary warriors. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan encountered them in the 920s and described them as living in wretched conditions, and yet being utterly ferocious, roaming like wild asses across the steppe. Now the Oghuz Yabgu state was not the only power on that steppe. To their west lay one of the most fascinating and most forgotten empires of the medieval world, the Khazar Khaganate. The Khazars were Turkic themselves. Powerful, sophisticated, and startling, their ruling elite had converted to Judaism in the 8th or 9th century, making them the only major Turkic state in history to adopt that faith. They controlled the trade routes between the Silk Road east and the Viking-dominated north. For centuries, they were the buffer between the Islamic caliphates and the nomadic north. And somewhere in the service of the Khazars was a man, a warrior, a commander, a man whose bloodline would one day rule from the Mediterranean to the edge of India. His name was Tughril Temur Yalig, and those last 2 words, they were not just a name, they were a declaration. In Old Turkic, Temur Yalig means iron bow. In Oghuz culture, the bow was a symbol of sovereignty. Not every man carried that nickname. The man who did was not a simple soldier. He was a military commander. The chronicler Merkfand, drawing on the ancient Malaknama, the lost Book of Kings, tells us Tughril served as chief counsel to the king of the Khazars. He was powerful enough to strike the Khazar Yabgu with a mace, actually knock him from his horse during a political dispute, and survive. The nobles refused to have him executed. That tells you everything. Tughril was not a man you killed lightly. He would die around 924 AD while accompanying the Yabgu on a military campaign. But his story did not end there. It had barely begun, because Tughril had a son. His name was Seljuk. Sources differs. Some say he grew up in the heart of the Oghuz Yabgu state. Some say he followed his father's path and served the Khazars. The medieval historian Ibn Hasul, who wrote during the reign of Seljuk's own grandson Tughril, records the family's deep Khazar connections without doubt. Seljuk named his sons Israel, Michael, Moses, Joseph, and Jonah. Every single one are biblical names. Hebrew names, names from the Jewish tradition. At some point, likely in the 950s or 960s, Seljuk had a falling out with the Yabgu of the Oghuz. The exact reason is lost to history. Power struggle, personal insult, political miscalculation. The sources are vague. What is not vague is what Seljuk did next. He left. He took his people. Historians estimate a small clan of perhaps 500 people, 100 horsemen, 1,500 camels, 50,000 sheep, and he walked away from the Oghuz Yabgu state. He marched east and south to a border town on the banks of the Sirdarya River, the city of Jand, known also as Jind, a scrappy, vibrant frontier town, part nomadic, part settled, where Muslim traders mixed with steppe warriors. A crossroads, a gateway, and it was here, around 985 AD, Seljuk and his clan converted to Islam. We should not underestimate this moment. This was not a bureaucratic decision. This was a man who had grown up in a world of Chaghri, the sky god, of shamans and animist spirits and the sacred horse, and he chose to submit to Islam. Why? Jand was full of Muslim missionaries and traders. Islam was everywhere around him. Perhaps he was convinced by the faith itself. Perhaps he saw strategic value in aligning with the Muslim world to his south. Perhaps both. What he did next tells us it was deeply sincere. The moment Seljuk converted, he expelled the tax collectors sent by the Oghuz Yabgu to Jand. His message was stark. Muslims will not pay tribute to unbelievers. He then declared war on the non-Muslim Turks. Just like that, a minor clan chief in a border town had positioned himself as a holy warrior, a defender of the faith, a Muslim on the frontier of the Muslim world. The Samanids, the sophisticated Persian-origin dynasty that ruled from Bukhara, were always looking for skilled frontier warriors to protect their borders. Seljuk was exactly what they needed. He offered his services. They accepted. For the next decade, Seljuk and his men guarded the Samanid frontier. They fought Oghuz tribes who hadn't converted. They proved their loyalty. They learned how Islamic political systems worked, the courts, the titles, the customs. And in 999 AD, the Samanid Empire collapsed under pressure from the Karakanid Turks in the north and the Ghaznavids in the south. Suddenly, the Seljuks had no patron. Seljuk was very old by now. He died in Jand around 1009 AD. He never conquered a city. He never commanded an army of thousands. He was a minor chieftain of a small clan. But he had done something no one would fully understand for another generation. He had planted a seed. Seljuk left behind several sons, Arslan Israel, who would take the family title Yabgu, Musa, Yusuf, and Mikhail. But his sons, two boys raised by their grandfather Seljuk himself after their father's early death in battle against pagan Turks, their names were Tughril and Chaghri. Before we get to Tughril and Chaghri, we have to understand the world they were born into. And that world was dominated by one towering, terrifying figure, Mahmud of Ghazni, Sultan, conqueror, iconoclast. He commanded perhaps the most formidable professional army in the Islamic world, disciplined infantry, cavalry, and most feared of all, his war elephants. Mahmud was not a man anyone crossed lightly. Around 1025 to 1026, Mahmud campaigned against Ali Tejan and the Karakhanids in Transoxiana. The Seljuks, who had been fighting on Ali Tejan's side, suddenly found themselves in a very dangerous position. Arslan Israel tried to negotiate. He presented himself to Mahmud. It was meant to be a peace meeting, a gesture of submission, an offer of military alliance. But Mahmud's governor of Tus, a man named Arslan Jazib, whispered in the Sultan's ear, "Why did you bring these Turkmens into your territory? This was a mistake. Either kill them all or cut off their fingers so they cannot draw their bows." Mahmud called Arslan Israel a merciless suggestion, but he could not ignore the danger. So Mahmud did something that would haunt his successors for decades. He arrested Arslan Israel and threw him in a dungeon. Arslan Israel was imprisoned in Kalinjar Fort deep inside India, in what is now the state of Madhya Pradesh. Far from his people, his horses, his steppe. He died there in captivity around 1032 AD, never seeing the sky of Khorasan again. This act did not break the Seljuks. It radicalized them. It proved to every Seljuk warrior that the Ghaznavids could not be trusted. The early 11th century was a period of constant friction between Mahmud and the Seljuk-aligned Oghuz tribes in Transoxiana and around the Sirdaria. Jand, the city where Seljuk converted to Islam, was a strategically vital border town. Whoever controlled Jand controlled access to the steppe trade routes and could project power into Transoxiana. Mahmud understood this. Around 1008 to 1012, Mahmud of Ghazni campaigned north of the Oxus into Transoxiana, not specifically against the Seljuks, but against the Karakhanid ruler Ali Tejan. The Seljuks at this time were still a minor Oghuz clan, allied at different moments with Ali Tejan. Their base near Jand, on the Sirdaria frontier, was directly in the path of Ghaznavid forces. Fighting here was not a single grand battle. It was years of raids, skirmishes, shifting alliances, and rapid cavalry warfare. Mahmud's forces were experienced in Central Asian warfare as well as Indian campaigns. While elephants were part of his army in India, they were not decisive in the Sirdaria steppe campaigns. The real issue was not elephants. It was political fragmentation and endless frontier instability. The Seljuks did not defeat Mahmud, but they survived, and survival in steppe politics was everything. The arrest of Arslan Israel changed everything. Suddenly, the Seljuks were leaderless at the family's senior level. Their uncle Musa took the nominal title, the Yabgu, but real power began to flow to the two brothers, Tughril and Chaghri. They chose a different path. At the Battle of Nisa and Dandanakon, they crushed the Ghaznavids' forces under the command of Mahmud's son Masud of Ghazni, after which they occupied whole of Khorasan and rich cities like Nishapur, Merv, and Sarax. We have already made a detailed video on this topic. Link is in the description. That's all for now. In the next video, we will discuss the rise of Tughril and Chaghri, their political strategy, their entry into Baghdad, and their confrontation with the Buyids.